So if you're anything like us, well, frankly, like a lot of people we've been talking to lately, there's this feeling sort of hangs in the air. Deep exhaustion, almost crippling sometimes with the current social climate and all that pressure to conform, to think a certain way about social justice. I think you know that feeling, right?
Yeah, it really is pervasive, isn't it? It's hard to miss. And that feeling, that exhaustion, that's exactly what we want to dive into today. Our mission here is really to unpack what this is, where it came from, trace its origins, look at how it's evolved over, decades now. And we're sticking just to the sources you shared with us for this.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Yeah.
Because the big question in our sources frame it like this.
Yeah.
How did we even get here to this point where, like, every word, every action, even silence gets scrutinized for its correct, and it leads to this widespread burnout, right, from decades, really, of being pressured and lectured into caring about absolutely all the issues all the time, all at once. It's a huge thing to ask.
It is huge. And it's something a lot of us are grappling with day to day. So our promise to you listening is this isn't just going to be a dry summary. We're going to pull out the really striking examples, the historical parallels from the sources, the things that really light up this phenomenon, hopefully give you a clear picture of how we got here and I guess why it matters to understand it.
Right. So to really get into this fatigue, the sources pull us right into today, into what they call insane meltdown. You might remember some of this, like the huge reactions around Sydney Sweeney's jeans ad or Billie Eilish.
Oh, yeah.
The sources we looked at point to accusations just flying. Things like Nazi propaganda, racist shit, even linking, a jeans ad to eugenics, Nazism, white supremacy. It's pretty intense for an ad, wouldn't you say?
It certainly is. And what's really interesting is how the sources suggest this isn't just random anger. It's presented as highlighting this intense pressure. They explain that these meltdowns, which seem maybe proportionate or insane, are actually seen by some as logical extensions of a certain viewpoint, an ideology where even small things, perceived slights, are seen as part of a bigger systemic issue, oppression. And so they need an equally big public and often quite severe response.
Okay, seeing that underlying logic or the logic presented in the sources, that helps make sense. And they detail the consequences too. Real consequences for people who don't conform. Things like being fired and shunned, socially ostracized, attacked online. And it's not just famous people. It's about missteps like using the wrong pronoun maybe, or culturally appropriating something, taking customs or ideas from another culture without acknowledgement or maybe inappropriately, or even just having a different opinion.
Exactly. The material even gives these really specific examples, like a toddler suspended from nursery, accused of transphobia or homophobia, or someone attacked just for how they voted, even if they felt it was a moral candidate.
Wow.
It really drives home that core feeling the sources talk about, that crippling exhaustion from this relentless pressure. Everything feels hyper-politicized, no escape.
So the big question remains, how did we get to this point where the pressure is just everywhere and reactions are so extreme? Well, the sources suggest this isn't totally new. It's more of an evolution. The roots of wokeness, as they put it, are deep in political correctness back in the 80s and 90s.
Yes, the parallels are quite striking when you look back. The term political correct, it was initially used both to describe and to criticize those progressive efforts, right? Efforts to curb offensive language, offensive behavior, especially on university campuses. That's where you saw policies trying to block certain opinions spread.
And it wasn't just some academic debate either. The New York Times, way back in 1990, they ran an article, The Rising Hegemony of the Politically Correct. And it described college campuses as a, quote, breeding ground for a regimented leftist ideology.
Wow, indeed.
Yeah. And said this ideology promoted intolerant, closed debate, pressured people to conform, or else risk being accused of sexism, racism, and homophobia. Sounds incredibly familiar, doesn't it?
It really does. Almost eerily familiar. And Newsweek was right there, too. They had that cover with giant letters spelling out thought police.
Right.
Even someone like George Carlin, the comedian, he was already mocking it back then, making fun of PC language or soft language, like changing handicap to differently abled or shell shock to post-traumatic stress disorder. Carlin definitely saw something coming. He argued it was stopping people from facing the truth.
So fast forward a bit to the early 2000s. The sources make it pretty clear that PC had become, an insult for many people, seen as stifling free speech, shutting down different opinions. But, and this is interesting, there was that counter narrative too. Supporters saw it differently.
Right. They framed it as promoting tolerance and inclusivity.
Right.
And they famously argued that nobody had the right to offend without consequence. That tension was really starting to build.
Definitely. And that tension, according to the material, just got more intense after 9/11.
Yeah. The sources point to that as a key moment. Media outlets started avoiding terms like Islamic terrorism, trying to avoid offending Muslims.
Which led to debate, right? Conservatives arguing it obscured the issue.
While progressives contended it fueled xenophobia, it became this very public, very sensitive argument about language itself, language as a battleground.
And it wasn't just that one term. other shifts were happening, like illegal alien moving towards undocumented migrant.
Yeah, or the word spaz becoming widely seen as offensive.
And just calling things gay as an insult that started becoming unacceptable socially.
And alongside this, you see more and more diversity training and speech guidelines popping up in universities, workplaces.
Okay, and then came the game changer, early social media.
Exactly. Here's where things really start to speed up, according to the platforms like MySpace, Facebook, then later Reddit, Tumblr. They just amplified everything, all these public discussions. Suddenly, activists had new tools, really powerful tools to call out behavior they saw as offensive. And these online activist communities, they could really flourish. It created this whole new way to apply social pressure fast.
That amplification, that polarization.
Yeah.
The sources argue that really set the stage for what they call the woke era, where social media just put everything on steroids. By the early 2010s, you had these two very distinct camps, as the material describes them. Those seeing political correctness as a moral necessity, basically, and those seeing it as censorship, another form of social control.
And this, the sources suggest, this split, this is really where the foundation of the coming fit started, that constant push and pull.
Right. And this is also when the word woke itself changes meaning, isn't it?
Yes. Around 2014 or so, it shifted. It originally came from Black Americans, signifying racial awareness, but it got repurposed, broadened to describe this sort of hyper-vigilant social justice mindset.
And SJW, social justice warrior, that popped up around the same time.
Yeah, often used, sometimes critically, sometimes not, for people seen as maybe overly zealous in pursuing socialist aims.
And then platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they just, as you said, turbocharged it all.
Totally. Activism became instantaneous and public. Yeah. Terms like privilege, unearned advantages based on identity,
right?
Microaggressions, those subtle, maybe unintentional slights, and cultural appropriation, these terms spread like wildfire.
Hashtags made things go viral instantly, creating immense pressure to publicly align with progressive causes.
And the sources point out how even not participating, like not tweeting hashtag BLM, could be framed as complicity. They even cite Desmond Tutu. If you're neutral in situations of injustice, you're siding with the oppressed. That kind of thing became quite prevalent.
And we saw some really memorable images from the BLM protests that spread widely online. Things like cops kneeling, or those videos of white people doing struggle sessions.
Right, washing Black people's feet or gathering in circles to apologize. It highlighted that public, sometimes almost performative aspect of the pressure.
In the mid-2010s, it wasn't just about race, was it? The sources talk about a lot happening then.
No, it broadened significantly. You had the rise of the trans movement, discussions around gender ideology, fat acceptance, and what the sources call a significant, sometimes maybe bewildering expansion of the LGBTQIA-XYZ.
Which all brought, as the sources note, their own set of rules and regulations.
Yeah.
Around language, around self-ID, the idea that you define your own gender. So much new ground.
And this all leads to wokeness becoming, pretty quickly, the cultural expectation. Terms like toxic masculinity, white privilege, white fragility, they enter the mainstream conversation.
The material even mentions a test for white fragility.
Yes, and it goes into the argument behind it, the idea that white people are racist. Not necessarily intentionally, but because they were raised in racedoms, rewarded by racism, and defended by systems built on.
So it's a systemic argument, not just about individual prejudice.
Exactly. The sources suggest it views race as this inescapable social construct. It automatically implicates people in dominant groups, even without conscious intent.
Which leads to what you might call social policing. The sources use that Yale Halloween email incident from 2015 as a prime example.
Yeah, where a professor questioned the guidelines on culturally sensitive costume, and her husband was threatened by students. She was almost forced out.
Right. And campaigns like, "My culture is not your costume." The policing stretched to hairstyles, clothes, even music. The dreadlocks example comes up. It paints this picture of constant vigilance, constant monitoring.
And you can't ignore sports getting involved either. Colin Kaepernick kneeling in 2016.
Yeah, and Nike partnering with him later.
That cultural pressure led to actual change. Sports teams. The Indians, the Reds changing their name, trying to avoid being seen as racially insensitive.
But the sources we looked at, they really point to 2020 onwards as the moment, the moment where things went totally haywire.
Yeah, that period seems crucial in the narrative.
Attributed to a mix of things. Lockdowns, people having way too much time alone, too much time online.
And the explosion of TikTok.
Right. And remember, the aftermath of George Floyd's death, the material describes it as people went absolutely mad. You had the fiery but mostly peaceful reporting and what the sources call wide-scale justification for civil unrest.
It was an intense time, and online you had things like Blackout Tuesday, those black squares everywhere on Instagram, and those videos, mainly white girls painting blackface.
And trigger warnings.
Yeah.
They were already around, especially in academia, but they just became ubiquitous.
Social media, classrooms, workplaces, even news outlets listing problematic moves.
Like Forrest Gump because of AIDS, or Indiana Jones for how it depicted Hindus and Indians.
Yeah, those examples were cited.
And it's that feeling, that softness and the squishiness, the sources put it, the desire to be offended by everything. That's what they argue makes wokeness so incredibly exhausting.
An overemphasis on feelings, maybe, validating individual truths over, say, universally accepted facts.
Yeah, and they give examples like cry closets or safe spaces at universities like the University of Utah, places designed to shield students from uncomfortable ideas.
This period also saw the huge rollout of DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The sources mentioned Coca-Cola's 2021 Be Less White session as one.
And the book White Fragility being used widely as a teaching tool.
Yeah, and the sources note what they describe as a staggering growth in anti-white rhetoric, permeating academia, politics, entertainment, often under the guise equity, inclusion, or righting historical wrong.
Including some pretty controversial claims like Irish ancestors being slaves.
Or the assertion that it's not possible to be racist towards white people, this idea of reverse racism not being real.
And then another trend emerges, self-diagnosed mental illness, particularly on TikTok.
Right, terms like neurodivergent, autism, ADHD, they went mainstream there. And the sources indicate users would self-diagnose, demand accommodation.
And sometimes, reportedly, use these labels as an excuse to shrug off adulthood, evade responsibility.
It's described as people starting to collect labels like they were non-binary, disabled, polyamorous, and then becoming offended if others didn't immediately adhere to or recognize these self-declared labels.
In this whole climate, this perpetually offended state, it hit humor and comedy hard.
Yeah, the sources argue that comedy has been almost really kind of fully been replaced by political activism in many spaces.
Comedians getting canceled. They mention Isaac Butterfield, Jenna Marbles, TV shows getting sanitized.
It speaks to what the sources call an insufferable lack of nuance.
That lack of nuance feels key here. The idea that everything to the progressive left seems to be black and white, no room for gray areas.
Which leads to labels like bigot, Nazi, xenophobe, homophobe, sexist, misogynist, being applied, as the sources say, so liberally to anyone who deviates even slightly from this very narrow social justice path.
And the language keeps changing constantly. It feels like every word you say now could be a potential crime.
Right, like homeless versus unhoused, or calling something crazy, being labeled ableist. It's like walking on eggshells, a linguistic mind.
And finally, there's this element of woke cultural guilt tripping.
Yeah, the accounts describe this feeling. If you're tied to Western culture, or if you're a white person, you're somehow supposed to feel shame and embarrassed for your ancestor.
Concepts like decolonizing, unlearning your heritage.
It gets almost absurd. The sources mention things like hiking, gardening, even breathing clean air being labeled white supremacy.
It's this sense that politics is shoved into every corner of life. Makes it hard to find a moment just to breathe.
Yeah, breathe.
So, okay, after tracing that whole long history, all its twists and turns, from early PC right up to today's hyper-politicized world, it's really no wonder the sources keep coming back to that core theme, exhaust, that pervasive woke fatigue. It's quite a journey through decades of pressure, isn't it?
It really is, and it kind of leads you to reflect, doesn't it, on the possibility that, look, maybe some of this started with the best of intent. Bleeding hearts, progressives wanting to genuinely create a better world for minorities.
Yeah, you can see that initial impulse, perhaps. But then, the sources strongly argue that the outcome, the way it played out, has fractured and divided people. It ended up creating victim groups and maybe driving the rest of us away.
The argument is that any potential goodness in these ideologies got, squashed. And people who might have been open to them, even amenable, have been alienated instead, driven away. It's a powerful point about unintended consequence. The methods perhaps undermining the goals.
Which leaves us with a pretty big question, something for you, the listener, to think about.
Does forcing people constantly to be aware of all does that actually make for a cohesive society in the long run?
Yeah. Or does all the progressive screaming, the PC stuff, the wokeness, the policing of language, policing thoughts, does it ultimately just push people away so hard that they vow never ever to participate in those ideologies again, or maybe ever?
It's definitely something to consider. We really encourage you to think about your own experiences, your perspective on this whole complex, and how this deep dive, this look back at the resonates with you today.